De reprise de débat, the member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to join this debate on the opposition motion which calls for the government to table a fiscally responsible budget before the House adjourns for the summer and that reverses the inflationary policies of this past 9.5 years under this Liberal government. So let's be clear about a few things, Mr. Speaker. This most assuredly is not a new government. There has not been a change of government. This is a continuation of the existing government. This is a new Prime Minister, that's true. But this is not a new government, nor is his presence new. The Prime Minister spent the last 5 years as advisor to the last Prime Minister. And anyone attending question period can see for themselves that the front bench in this Parliament is a lot like the front bench in the last Parliament. The new Minister for Transportation is the old Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Global Affairs Minister, and Trade Minister. The new Finance Minister is the old Industry Member, Global Affairs Minister, and Infrastructure Minister. The new President of the King's Privy Council is, well, he's the old President of the King's Privy Council, and so on and so on and so on along their front benches. So this is absolutely the same Liberal government that we have endured for the last 9.5 years. The same crew of ministers and advisors that have provided over 9.5 years of economic and fiscal vandalism are still in charge. In the timeless words of Pete Townsend, sung by Roger Daltrey, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. This government, with a bunch of the same ministers, came into power in 2015. They inherited a balanced budget, and what the New York Times, and I know the Liberals, they would appreciate that as a newspaper of record, they called Canada's middle class the wealthiest middle class in the world back in 2015. The Liberals were elected on a promise to run modest deficits to fund unprecedented investments in infrastructure which lead to the budget balancing itself in 2019. Well, none of that happened, Mr. Speaker. The Liberals immediately plunged Canada into structural deficits without building any of the productivity-enhancing infrastructure that they had promised, and presided over a decade of zero per capita economic growth. Every single year, they piled on more and more debt while claiming to be bound by various fiscal metrics, always moving their own goalposts. Fiscal anchors and guardrails were declared and immediately discarded. Their 2015 election promise to balance the budget was completely forgotten. And by early 2020, some $90 billion had already been added to the national debt before anybody had even heard of COVID-19. In early 2020, the country was on the brink of recession, and the Liberals were about to blow through all their budgetary projections and table a $60 billion deficit. Then what followed in the years since were adding another $400 billion in deficit spending, the majority of which had nothing to do with pandemic relief. And so here we are today, after 9.5 years of uninterrupted inflationary spending, borrowing, and money printing. After 9.5 years of this Liberal government consistently exceeding every previously announced spending limit, after 9.5 years of bloat, waste, insider dealing, sweetheart contracting, self-enrichment, and smug, sanctimonious self-congratulations, we are in the midst of a full-blown affordability crisis of this government's own making and with no plan to get out. Right now, millions of Canadians are thinking very seriously about how they are going to feed their families in the upcoming week. For some, that might mean substituting chicken for beef. For others, that may be going without fresh meat and substituting something they can find in the discounted previously frozen section. Many families will go without meat or fresh fruit or fresh vegetables and are wondering how many boxes of mac and cheese it will take to get them through the week, or how they're going to put nutritious meals together for their kids' lunches. Many Canadians are increasingly unable to pay for food at all and are turning to food banks, which have seen record use across Canada under this government. And not helping things at all, Mr. Speaker, is a housing crisis, which has also emerged during this government's 9.5 years. Average rent and mortgage costs have more than doubled since this government was elected in 2015. That's why we're debating this motion, Mr. Speaker. We are in a food inflation crisis long in the making. All the elements of the food inflation crisis, which is exacerbated by a housing affordability crisis, were long here before the trade war, but now there's even greater urgency. Last week's food inflation numbers are horrific. Beef sirloin up 34%, oranges up 26%, white rice up 14%, infant formula up 9%, and the list goes on. Canadian families will spend an average of nearly $17,000 on groceries this year. And Mr. Speaker, we know that taxes, government spending, deficits, and printing money all contribute to inflation. The government has admitted as much. We also know that this government, who has once again claimed suddenly that it will do something to rein in its out-of-control spending during the most recent election. And we know that many Canadians appear to have believed this Prime Minister when he claimed to be different from the last Prime Minister and the other ministers that surround him in the last Parliament, when he said that he was going to control spending. But this Prime Minister, he brandished his resume and boasted about his experience as a crisis manager. So where is the plan to deal with this crisis and bring down inflation, reduce food prices, increase housing supply, and increase the productivity of the Canadian economy so Canadians who work hard can regain their place as the world's wealthiest middle class? Well, nowhere, Mr. Speaker. There is no plan to be found because this Prime Minister refuses to table one. He tabled an estimates bill, which appears to double down on all of the failed policies and strategies of the past 9.5 years. But they won't table a budget. In absence of a budget, all we can do is judge this government by the estimates that it's tabled. And the judgment is a terrible indictment on this new Prime Minister and this tired old government. The estimates show that the government is on track to be even worse than before. The estimates show an overall spending increase of 8% at a time when the Liberals promised to restore fiscal discipline. An 8% increase. That's an increase in spending without concrete solutions for any of Canada's major problems. It is not fiscal discipline, it's just bloat. The massive 34% increase in the use of third-party consultants is proof of both a refusal to deal with out-of-control spending and a clearly broken campaign promise. And I know there are some in the press gallery or elsewhere who will say, and have said, oh, no, the estimates are not comparable to last year. You can't just compare the mains from last year to this year. You have to wait until the subs are tabled later in the year. These are just the mains, and they're not the government's full spending plan for the year. Don't you know the difference between the estimates and a budget? Well, to those people, I say, yes, we do know the difference. The estimates are the money that the government will actually be authorized to spend. It's not a budget. That's exactly the point. There is no budget. The Liberals campaigned on being a safe pair of hands in a crisis, the man with the plan, just enough change so that you might forget about how incompetent and unserious the previous government was for 9.5 years. And now it turns out there's no plan at all. Just a bunch of new spending that will have to be funded by taxes and borrowing, paid for by people who are literally struggling to put food on the table. Well, Parliament was adjourned, prorogued, and then dissolved since mid-December. So for nearly 6 months, this Parliament sat idle. The last sort of mini-budget that was delivered by nobody. There was literally no name on the fall economic statement and no minister attached to it during Justin Trudeau's last-ditch attempt to remain in power. Well, 6 months later, Canadians are entitled to a detailed plan and at least some degree of honesty and transparency about how this government will tax, spend, and borrow, and how much the deficit will be, and if there is any plan, even another phony plan, to eventually balance the budget. This is the absolute minimum owed by this government to Canadians. It was demanded by the people's representative in this House last week, and so let me add my voice to those calling on this government to table a budget before the summers. Canadians, won't get fooled again.
Men's questions et commentaires. The Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for his speech. I think we do agree on one thing. We agree that Canadians want a detailed plan. Canadians want us to really take our time to come up with a budget that is thoughtful and that responds to exactly what they send us in the House to do. And Mr. Speaker, they send us to the House to make sure that we can deliver on things like affordability, and we had the plans to do that, and that's why we came back in government. Can the member opposite confirm that he's going to support some of the bills that Canadians send us to do in this House, like Bill C-5, which will remove the borders to make sure that we have one Canadian economy that works for all provinces? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
So, Mr. Speaker, this is so typical of what we saw throughout the entire last Parliament. A government that prorogued this House and dissolved Parliament and forced this Parliament to sit idle for 6 months now demands to know, can we drop everything and just rubber stamp their legislation? This seems to be what this member would suggest, that they can ignore Parliament for months at a time, and then somehow it's the opposition's fault if their agenda isn't immediately adopted. So, where was this government from December on, when a budget could have been tabled and Canada's urgent problems could have been addressed?
Questions et commentaires. Le député pour Montcalm.
The honourable member for Montcalm. I have a question or something my colleague could comment on. Does he not find it curious that our Prime Minister, who was a banker, asked the King to come here to set us apart from the US, but that the first thing that the PM did was to sign a Trump-style decree, saying he didn't need this House in order to bring in this decree, all while the House was adopting a motion saying that we wanted a budget, or at any rate a serious economic statement. Is this not just another example of a monarch-style Prime Minister who is denying parliamentary democracy?
Well, the member raises a great point. That was a disturbing and chilling bit of political theater when we watched the Prime Minister sit down as if we were in a presidential system and signed some kind, I don't even know what was on that piece of paper, but felt that he had the power to usurp what is normally the prerogative of this House. It was disturbing and chilling. Maybe it was just his ignorance and of parliamentary process in our system, and his comms people thought it would look funny. I don't know, but it wasn't good.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The member for Kamloops-Shuswap Central Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and you're doing a great job up there in the new role, recognizing all the names, because there were so many changes in this last election, like my riding name change as well. Really appreciate the knowledge. I'd like to ask my colleague if he's ever experienced any level of government or organization, large organization, be it nonprofit or for-profit, that has ever gone this length of time without presenting a budget that could be evaluated by anybody that might be opposed.
The member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
No, I have not.
Questions and comments. The member for Barrie South Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to ask the honourable member, not having a budget, there's been rumors that they may separate operational and capital budgets so that we don't get a full reading of the state of finances in this country as it relates to revenue, debt, deficit. Does he think that that's a possibility with this government?
Member for Calgary-Crowfoot, a short answer.
Well, he has certainly signaled that he would like to do that, which is using accounting trickery to deceive Canadians about the true nature of the deficit. This has been tried at the provincial level. It doesn't work. It's a mistake if he wants to go that route.
Resuming the